So for example number 2, we have this polynomial p to the 4th power plus p to the, that should be 3p. That would have made a big difference. 3p cubed minus 74p squared minus 42p minus 20. And we're going to solve for p. And so the first step would be to graph it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Desmos graphing calculator, okay? And I'm just going to take this and I'm going to plug it into the Desmos calculator, but you have to use x instead of p. So I'm going to say x, shift 6 is how you get into the superscript. And so I'm going to say 4, right arrow, plus 3x, shift 6, gets me up into the superscript. 3 minus 74, x, shift 6, gets me into the superscript. Minus 42, x, oops, got a little gung-ho there, minus 20, okay? Now when I zoom out, this is what that graph looks like. But what's nice about Desmos, I'm trying to find out where it crosses. So it crosses here, but I don't want to do long division with that number, okay? So that is definitely a solution, but I don't want to multiply stuff by 7.564. So let's try to find a better one. So the reason we're graphing this is that we want to find where it crosses the x-axis. Now that I can work with, okay? That I can work with. So let's take a screenshot of that real quick. Oops, wrong button. Shoot. I got a lot of stuff going on here. So let's take a screenshot of that. Okay. We're going to graph it in Desmos, and then we're also going to graph this in our fancy calculator. So we'll fire that up. I shouldn't have closed it. I should have minimized it. But what that is telling us is that x negative 10 is a solution. In other words, negative 10 is a solution. And sometimes we call that a 0 because that's what it is, because y equals 0 when x equals negative 10. And sometimes we'll call that a root because at some point when we go to solve it, we might need to take a square root. So we call them roots too. Okay. So my fancy calculator should be loaded now. And so I'm going to graph this on my fancy calculator. So I'm just going to go into my 84 plus, and then I plug it in under y equals. So remember, you hit y equals, let me start over from scratch, right? So when you turn this on, you're going to hit y equals, and then I hit x raised to the 4th power, right? Plus 3 x raised to the 3rd power, hit the right cursor, minus 74 x raised to the 2nd power minus 42 x minus 20. And then remember, like we did yesterday, we're going to hit zoom and we go down to 0. Now another way you could go is if you hit the up button, it takes you down to the bottom. But anyway, 0 is zoom fit. If we hit 0, we'll get this thing. Again, we think that when x equals negative 10, it's a solution, but I'm going to hit trace, and then I'm going to put in negative 10. And guess what? Yep, that is a solution. Same thing on this graph, so we'll take a screenshot of that. Now I'm showing you both calculators because sometimes, like on Desmos is embedded in the SAT, so I want you to learn how to use Desmos. But I also want you to learn how to use the graphing calculator, because other tests that you'll take, like a college placement exam or something like that, they'll let you use those fancy calculators sometime. So anyways, this same thing on this one, same graph. So then step 2 would be set equal to 0. So I'm going to say x equals -10. To set that equal to 0, I'm going to add 10 to both sides. So I get x plus 10 equals 0. Okay? That means that x plus 10 is a factor. Okay? That's step 2. So if I set it equal to 0, in other words, I look at this part right here, and I say, how do I make that 0? I'm going to add 10. But whatever I do on one side of the equal sign, I have to do to the other. That gives me x plus 10 equals 0. Whenever we have something situated like that, that means that this stuff right here is a factor. Step 3, divide. Now we're going to do long and synthetic. That's an H. Okay. All right. So we're going to go way up here, and I'm going, well, let me zoom out so you guys can finish writing that. So I'm going to, way over here, I'm going to say x plus 10, and that's going to go into p to the 4th plus 3p cubed minus 74p squared minus 42p minus 20. And I'm going to zoom way in because I'm going to try and fit the synthetic in with the all on the same page with the long division. So, oh, did you see what I did there? This is actually supposed to be p. Dope. All right. So I think to myself, what do I multiply p by to get p to the 4th? That's p to the 3rd. Okay. P to the 3rd times 10 is 10 p to the 3rd. P to the 3rd times p is a and that's a positive 10. P to the 4th, we're going to add opposites. So that means this becomes negative, this becomes negative, okay? I'm going to, whoops, I don't want that. I'm going to go to second quit, and I'm going to say negative, what was it? Negative 10 plus 3. Let me move this out of the way there. Okay? That gives me negative 7. So the p to the 4th power adds up to 0, and then this becomes a negative 7p to the 3rd. Again, I think to myself, what do I multiply this by to get this? Also, I'm going to have to drop this down. Okay. Well, that would be plus 7p squared. Oh, no it won't. It has to be negative, right? Because this is negative. This has to be negative because I'm going to multiply negative 7 times positive 1. Whew. Almost messed that up. All right, so then I multiply that through. Negative 7 times 10 is negative 70. tack on the p squared. Negative 7 times 1 is negative 7. P squared times p is p to the third. We're going to add the opposites. Those negatives become positive. These add up to 0, right? And then these add up to something. Let's see what that is. So on my handy-dandy calculator, I say negative 74 plus 70. And I get negative 4p squared. Drop down the negative 42. Again, I got to think to myself, what do I multiply 1p by to get negative p squared? I think negative 4, right? And then p times p equals p squared. All right, so negative 4p times 10 is a negative 40p. Negative 4p times p is negative 4p squared. We're going to add the opposites. So this negative becomes positive and this negative becomes positive. If I did my math right, these will cancel out or add up to 0. And then negative 42 plus 40, so I'm going to do that on the calculator. Negative 42 plus 40 gives me negative 2. Sweet. So this becomes negative 2p. We're going to drop down the negative 20. I think to myself, what do I multiply 1p by to get negative 2p? The answer is negative 2. Okay. So then when I multiply that through, I get negative 2p. Negative 2 times 10 is negative 20. We're going to add the opposite. So those negatives become positives. And I have a remainder of 0. So this up here, this is our answer. Okay? So that's long division. Let's do the same thing with synthetic division. So for synthetic division, remember that we said that x equals minus 10 is a solution, and we think, so synthetic, what we're really doing is we're dividing by x plus 10. Right? But we just write down the negative 10 here. And remember, the coefficients that I'm about to write down represent p to the fourth, p to the third, p squared, p to the first, and p to the 0. So we have to have something for each one of those. Let me zoom out so you see where I'm getting these numbers from, okay? So I'm going to find my numbers from this. So the term here in the front is 1, so I put a 1 here. The coefficient of p to the third is a positive 3, so I'm going to put a 3 here. The coefficient of p squared is negative 74, so I put a negative 74 here. The coefficient of p is negative 42. Negative 42. And p to the 0 is just a constant, so that's negative 20. And that's all we do. Okay? Let's zoom back in. That's where those numbers come from. We're just taking the letters, or not the letters, the coefficients, which are the numbers in front of the letters, and we're putting them here. In other words, it's 1p to the 4th power plus 3p to the 3rd power minus p squared minus 42p minus 20. So to do this, the algorithm is very simple. I'm going to drop down the 1, I get a 1. Then I'm going to say negative 10 times 1, which is negative 10, and write that here. Next, I'm going to add these up. So I'm going to write this down. I'm going to say that goes there. When I add those up, I get negative 7. Again, I'm going to multiply negative 10 times negative 7. That's a positive 70. When I add these up, I'm going to get negative 4. Again, I'm going to multiply my negative 10 times negative 4, and I get a positive 40. When I add those up, I get negative 2. Again, I'm going to multiply negative 10 times negative 2, which is a positive 20. I'm going to put that right here. When I add those up, I get 0. My remainder is 0. So since we're dividing by the power of x, I put x, but technically it should be p equals negative 10. I keep doing that. And technically, this should be p plus 10. You don't have to change it in your notes, but so because we're dividing by that, this should be p squared. This should be, or I'm sorry, p to the 3rd power, p squared, p, and then negative 2. Notice that this is the same answer that we got up top. Okay? I also want to point out a couple of things that's kind of interesting. I don't know if you guys have picked up on this yet, but check this out. I've got 1p here to the 3rd power, 1p here. But here's the cool part. I've got a minus 10 here. I've got a minus 10 here. See how that's there? I've got a plus 70 here. Guess what? I'm adding 70p squared here. I'm adding 40 here. Guess what? I'm adding 40 here. See how that works? And then I'm adding 20 here. Remainder of 0, remainder of 0. So they both do the same thing, and they are the exact same answer. All right? And then one last thing before we close. Remember what this means is that p plus 10 times the quantity p cubed minus 7p squared minus 4p minus 2. If I multiply that out, it's going to equal p to the 4th plus 3p cubed minus 74p squared minus 42p minus 20. Okay? That's what that means. That's it. I'll leave that up there for you guys to kind of finish writing all that stuff down.